I hacked my parents' Swinger account when I was a teenager, so this was back in the mid-2000s. I was 19 at the time, at university, and spending significant time away from home. Looking back now, I do recall both her and my father's behavior at dinner parties they would host, so I'm honestly not surprised. Anyway, one particular night while I was writing some assignments up, I found an adult dating site in the browser history. Now, I can't give you a reason as to why I did what I did. Suffice it to say that I was too horny for my own good, and that my mother was relatively young and attractive. And being the eldest child, I knew it could not be from a sibling. This was long before autofill existed, so I had nothing to really go off, except that it was either one of my parents, or both. As I grew up while the internet was in its infancy, I had an understanding about computer programming, so I found and installed a keylogger and had it run in the background. Sure enough, the next week I came back. After I trawled through 7 days of logs, I had a username and password, so I logged in. What I found was my parents' couple's profile for swinging, which had been active for over a year, with chat logs and full profile. There was around 20 photos uploaded, pretty much all of my mother, including full nudity spread, using toys, and one of her performing oral onto men.
I was the school phantom shitter. If I had let this secret out during its time, I would have been mortified, crucified, and full of shame. However, I now laugh on it and tell the story. I was always a pretty normal kid. I was in 9th grade. And my best friend, Ian, and I did cross-country together. It was a rainy day, so coach had us run on the indoor track in circles. We both look at each other and both say, "I gotta take a dump." We snuck away from practice and went to the locker room. Ian got in first, and the other stall had some sort of hellish shitacane going on there, in which no one would dare use even in an emergency. So, you know that one pair of shoes in the locker room that had been in there forever, and no one had ever claimed them, nor have they moved in what seemed like an eternity. Well, I just had to shit. My 14 or 15-year-old self also thought it would be hilarious to show him the massive dump I was about to produce, and in a shoe, because you know, teenage boys are stupid and have that kind of humor. I still do, and always will. By the way, I proceed to open the tongue of the shoe and drop the single fattest and longest turd into these mid-top Nikes. He comes out, and I have this shit-eating grin. I told him to go over to where the shoes were, and he goes, "Oh dude, gross. That's sick, sick as in gross." We had our laughs and returned to practice and never thought anything of it. However, the next day, there was a bit of commotion in gym class in second period. The locker room reeked of doo-doo. People were frantically looking, but no one could find the source. Then, Jermaine comes in and yells, "Man, someone shit in my shoe," for the rest of the day. Everyone was looking for the phantom shitter, wondering who did it. Ian and I kept our mouths shut, and to this day, no one has ever found out who took a shit in Jermaine's shoe. I have moved since then several times, so whoever I tell it to has no connection to my old high school. Edit. Yes, I wiped. I did not know they belonged to Jermaine or whoever else.
When I was 10, I insulted a random lady on the phone and totally got away with it. As a child, I sometimes liked to do telephone pranks. Usually these pranks were very tame. I would call a random number and creepily breathe into the phone while the other person would say, "Hello? Hello?" until they eventually hung up and I moved on to the next number. One afternoon, though, some middle-aged lady got super triggered. I guess she was the 90s version of a Karen. When she realized I was a child, she gave me an angry lecture about how I was misbehaving and how it wasn't acceptable. I don't know what it was about her, but something about her butthurt yelping got me really triggered too. I was actually a very sweet and well-behaved boy, and most adults loved me. Perhaps because of that, it really rubbed me the wrong way when she called me a snotty brat. I felt treated unfairly and wanted to give her a shitty day. So I laughed in a rude tone and said something like, "Yeah, well, you couldn't possibly know, 'cause you're dumb as rocks." There was a short pause. She was clearly stunned by my words before she totally freaked out. At this point, I let loose like my 10-year-old tongue had rarely let loose before. I called her a nasty old witch, a dumb crackwhore, a disease. You name it. Any insult that came to my mind, I promptly hurled at her. Some of the things I called her were hilarious, but some of them were 100% over the boundary. As in, I'd be angry if my child said them to an adult, let alone a stranger. Some of the things I called her were hilarious, but some of them were 100% over the boundary. As in, I'd be angry if my child said them to an adult, let alone a stranger. It was still a pretty new technology, and so when the lady claimed to have my landline phone number, the one I was calling from, I assumed it was just a bluff. Unfortunately, it wasn't. About 15 minutes later, she called back, and my mom picked up before I could stop her. At this point, I was genuinely terrified. Some of the things I had said were pretty horrible. Unfortunately, and I knew my mom would hate it. About 15 minutes later, she called back, and my mom picked up before I could stop her. At this point, I was genuinely terrified. Some of the things I had said were pretty horrible, and I knew my mom would hate it. Like I said, I was usually a goody-two-shoes who was always nice to everyone and brought home good grades from school, so it made sense for my mom to be very skeptical. And yet, that angry lady was totally right about what I had done. After some back and forth, my mom called me and said, "There's a lady here who claims that you called her before and insulted her horribly. Is that true?" I gave her my most innocent smile and said, "Huh? Insulted her? No, I was playing in my room. I didn't call anyone." My mom just said, "Yeah, I thought so." Then she went back on the phone and said to the lady, "I just asked my son, and he says he didn't do any such thing. I also don't think he would ever do such a thing. Frankly, you seem like you've got some screws loose. Don't call us anymore. You probably misdialed. Or maybe you imagined the whole thing." I heard the lady screaming and shouting in anger, and then my mom hung up on her and simply went back to her gardening work. I've never told my mom that that crazy lady actually hadn't been crazy, and that she had been saying the truth.